The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. Rain dragged itself down the windows in slow, crooked lines. Ethan Cole sat in a plastic chair with Mia pressed against his left side and Lily pressed against his right. Mia was 6 years old and still wore her hospital bracelet. Lily was 9 and had stopped crying 2 hours ago. Not because she felt better, but because she had decided crying wasn't useful anymore. Ethan held a bill in both hands. He had been holding it for 20 minutes without reading it. He already knew the number. He just didn't know what to do with it. That was when the woman walked in. She wore a charcoal coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She moved through the room like she had never once been unsure of where she was going. She stopped directly in front of him, set a thick folder on his lap, and said quietly and without hesitation, "Marry me. I'll help you raise your daughters." Ethan stared at her. Before he could speak, Lily stood up, stepped in front of her little sister, and looked the woman straight in the eye. "If you marry our dad, do you actually love us? Or do you just need a family to hide something?" If you're new here, this channel tells stories about real human choices, the kind that don't have easy answers. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, let's get into it. Ethan Cole had not always been a man who counted quarters. 3 years before that rain-soaked waiting room, he had a salary, a benefits package, and a wife named Clara, who made terrible pancakes every Sunday morning and refused to admit it. Back then, he had 2 daughters. Lily, who at 6 years old had already figured out that adults were mostly pretending, and Mia, who at 3 had a laugh so loud it embarrassed her in restaurants. He had a job he was good at, field engineer for a medical device company called Heartwell Systems, the kind of work that required precision and patience, and the ability to stay calm when something expensive was about to break. He had a life that was ordinary in all the ways that matter. Then Clara went in for a routine procedure, a minor cardiac correction. The surgeon had said, "Low risk, home by Thursday." She never came home. The official report cited surgical complications. Ethan read it 4 times and understood, somewhere beneath his grief, that the language had been chosen very carefully. He had his suspicions he was an engineer who worked on the exact category of equipment involved, and some things didn't add up in Clara's file. But the records he needed were sealed. The hospital's cooperation stopped at condolences, and grief is not a state in which a man can build a legal case. He filed what questions he could. He got nothing back. Eventually, he buried Clara and focused on keeping his daughters alive in the more immediate sense. He went back to work because he didn't know what else to do. And 3 months later, while running a maintenance check on a pressure monitoring unit in a regional hospital, he found something that wasn't supposed to be there. A calibration error, small enough to be invisible in a single reading, catastrophic enough to matter across hundreds of patients over time. He filed a report. Then he filed another. Then he sent both directly to the safety board at Heartwell's headquarters. 2 weeks later, he was called into HR and handed a termination notice. Restructuring, they said. Nothing personal. Within a month, his name appeared on an industry blacklist, so quietly distributed that no one ever mentioned it out loud. Calls stopped being returned. Interviews ended early. Doors closed in the particular way that means they were never going to open again. Ethan moved the girls into a smaller apartment. He sold Clara's car. He picked up contract work wherever he could find it. HVAC repairs, equipment rentals, anything with a wrench involved. He paid Mia's cardiology bills in installments and learned to have that specific conversation with hospital billing departments without letting his voice change. He kept the apartment warm. He kept the refrigerator stocked enough that the girls didn't notice when he skipped dinner. He kept his face steady. What he could not keep from Lily was the truth of the nights. She was 9 now, and she had her mother's particular talent for seeing through surfaces. She knew which nights her father sat at the kitchen table after she and Mia were in bed, because she could hear the specific silence of a man trying not to make noise while he worried. She knew when the calls came from debt collectors, because Ethan always stepped out onto the balcony to answer them, and she could hear the sliding door and then nothing. She knew what the envelopes from the hospital looked like before he opened them, and she watched his hands to see how bad it was. She had stopped asking him if he was okay. She already knew he would say yes. Instead, she started keeping a journal. A small notebook with a blue cover that Clara had given her the Christmas before she died. Write down the things you don't want to forget, her mother had told her. So Lily wrote. She wrote about Mia's laugh and the way her father's shoulders dropped when he thought no one was watching, and the sound the rain made on their particular window, and all the small things she was afraid of losing. She kept it under her pillow. Victoria Hayes had by every external measure already won. At 58, she was the chairman and majority shareholder of Hayes Global Medical, a healthcare conglomerate with operations in 11 countries. She had been on the cover of 4 business magazines. She had testified before Congress. She had never been married, had no children, and had declined over the course of her career to explain either fact to anyone who asked. The world understood Victoria Hayes through her decisions, the companies she acquired, the testimony she gave, the way she moved through rooms as though she had already read the agenda and found it satisfactory. She had built that understanding deliberately over decades because it was easier to be understood as a force than as a person. What the world did not see was the photograph she kept in the top drawer of her desk. Not displayed, not framed, just folded and placed there. Of a younger woman with Victoria's same jaw and darker eyes. Her sister, Renee, who had died 11 years ago following a surgical procedure complicated by a faulty pressure monitoring unit, manufactured by a company called Heartwell Systems. Victoria had been told it was a tragic anomaly. She had believed that for a long time. She had believed it until 6 weeks ago, a private investigator she had hired for an unrelated matter set a folder on her desk and said carefully, "You're going to want to read all of it." She read all of it. And then she put on her charcoal coat and drove to a hospital in the rain. Mia had collapsed during recess. That was how the school nurse described it when she called Ethan. Collapsed, like a small, controlled implosion. Mia had been running, and then she hadn't been running, and then she was on the ground with her cheek against the asphalt and a circle of second graders standing around her not knowing what to do. By the time Ethan reached the hospital, Mia was awake and asking for apple juice. But the cardiologist on call had pulled him aside and used words like accelerated intervention and window of treatment and we shouldn't wait much longer. The procedure Mia needed wasn't experimental. It wasn't even rare. It was simply expensive in the specific way that exposed every gap in Ethan's current situation, too costly for what remained of his savings, too specialized to be fully covered by the bare minimum insurance he'd managed to hold on to, and too urgent to defer while he figured something out. He sat in the waiting room with the bill in his hands and both daughters pressed against him, and tried to think of a single option he hadn't already eliminated. He was still trying when Victoria Hayes walked in. He recognized her immediately. He had seen her photograph in industry publications. Hayes Global Medical had absorbed 2 of Hartwell's former competitors in the years since his termination. He felt his jaw tighten before she even reached him. She sat down in the chair across from him without being invited. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with the steady, unhurried expression of someone who had decided what she was going to say and was simply waiting for the right moment to say it. "I know who you are," she said. I know what you found at Hartwell. I know what they did to you after you reported it. And I know what your daughter needs." "Then you know I'm not interested in whatever this is," Ethan said. "I haven't told you what it is yet." "You're about to offer me money," he said, "or a settlement, or some kind of arrangement that makes my silence worth something to you. I've had that conversation before. I know how it ends." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the folder she had brought and set it on top of the hospital bill in his hands. "I need a husband," she said. "Specifically, I need a man with a real family, real children, and a real reason to be in my life. For a foundation announcement I'm making in 4 months. In exchange, you get full medical coverage for both girls, a living arrangement that is safe and stable, and enough financial support to stop doing whatever it is you've been doing to keep the lights on." Ethan stared at her. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious." "That is insane." "It is practical," she said, "which is different." He opened his mouth to tell her exactly what she could do with her practical arrangement, and then Lily spoke. The girl had been sitting perfectly still beside him, which Ethan recognized too late as the posture she adopted when she was listening to every word. "You were crying," Lily said. Victoria turned to look at her. "When you came in," Lily continued, "before you sat down, you were looking at Mia through the window in the door, and you were crying." She paused. "People who just need a fake family don't cry at strangers in hospitals. So what is it that you actually need?" The silence that followed was the kind that changes the temperature of a room. Ethan watched Victoria Hayes, a woman who had testified before Congress without blinking, go very still under the gaze of a 9-year-old. Something moved behind her eyes. Not performance, not calculation. Something that had been behind a wall for a long time and was now unexpectedly visible. "I lost someone," Victoria said finally. "To the same kind of negligence that cost your father his career. And I didn't stop it when I could have. I've been trying to figure out how to make that mean something." She looked at Lily steadily. "That's what I actually need." Lily studied her for a long moment. Then she sat back down beside Ethan and said nothing more. That night, after the girls were asleep in the hospital's family waiting area, Ethan stood at the window and looked at the parking lot below, and thought about his options in the cold, clear way he could only manage when he was exhausted enough that his emotions couldn't keep up. He thought about Mia's face when the doctor explained what the procedure would do. He thought about Lily's voice when she had said on the drive over, "Dad, I don't need a big house. I just need Mia to still be here." In the morning, he called Victoria Hayes and told her he wanted to talk again. The house was the size of a problem Ethan hadn't anticipated. He had expected wealth. He had not expected the particular quality of silence that lived inside it. The kind that comes not from peace, but from absence. Victoria's estate sat behind a gated drive in a neighborhood where the houses were spaced far enough apart that you could almost forget other people existed. Inside, the ceilings were high, and the furniture was precise, and every surface was clean in the way that suggested no one had ever set a glass down without thinking about it first. She had prepared rooms for the girls. That was the first thing Ethan noticed, and it unsettled him more than the square footage. Lily's room had a reading nook with built-in shelves already stocked with books. Good books. The kind someone had actually thought about. Mia's room had an adjustable bed frame and a small medical monitor on the nightstand, and a mobile above it made of pale blue paper birds. Someone had spent real time on these rooms. Someone had made decisions. Lily walked in, looked around for approximately 4 seconds, and walked back out. She found Victoria in the hallway and looked up at her with the expression she reserved for math problems she suspected were trying to trick her. "Have you ever taken care of someone who was sick?" she asked. "Not paid someone to take care of them, actually done it yourself?" Victoria met her gaze. "No," she said, "I haven't." "Have you ever stayed up all night because you were scared you were going to lose someone?" A pause. "Not in the way you mean." "Then the room is nice," Lily said, "but it doesn't mean anything yet." She went back inside, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened her blue notebook. Ethan watched the whole exchange from the doorway and said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. The terms of the arrangement were straightforward, at least on paper. Ethan laid them out across the dining room table the following morning, while Mia ate cereal and Lily read, and Victoria sat with her coffee and listened without interrupting. Which Ethan noted, because most people interrupted. 3 conditions. First, the girls' images would not appear in any Hayes Global Medical Marketing press releases or public communications without Ethan's explicit written approval each time. Second, all medical decisions regarding Mia remained solely his, with Victoria's resources available only at his request. Third, if either Lily or Mia expressed at any point and for any reason that they wanted to leave the arrangement, ended. No negotiation, no delay. Victoria agreed to all 3 without asking for modifications. What she did not say, and what Ethan did not yet understand, was that she had already accepted somewhere in the quiet of her own thinking that the 3rd condition was the one most likely to end things. Not because she planned to fail the girls, but because she genuinely didn't know if she was capable of being what they needed. And she was honest enough with herself in private to admit it. The wedding was small. A judge, a conference room. 2 witnesses from Victoria's legal team. Mia wore her good shoes and held a single white flower someone had left on the table. Lily sat in the front row with her blue notebook on her lap. She had brought it without explanation, and no one asked, and watched the proceedings with the focused attention of someone taking notes on something important. Afterward, they moved in. The first 2 weeks were a sustained exercise in mutual discomfort. Ethan slept in the East Wing guest room, with the door open, in the specific way of a man making clear he was not hiding. Lily locked her door each night at 9, not out of fear, but out of principle, the way she locked things that she wasn't ready to share yet. Mia, who had her mother's instinct for emotional weather, moved through the house, picking up signals from everyone and trying not to let anyone see that she was doing it. Victoria tried. That was the accurate thing to say about those first weeks. She tried in the language she knew, which was the language of resources and logistics and problems that could be solved by applying the correct amount of the correct thing. She hired a specialist to review Mia's treatment plan. She enrolled Lily in a school with a strong academic program and a library that took up most of the 2nd floor. She stocked the kitchen with food she had researched rather than simply ordered, because she had noticed without being told that Mia didn't like anything green unless it was hidden in something else. And the more carefully she tried, the further Lily retreated. Not dramatically, not with anger, just the quiet, consistent withdrawal of a child who had learned to distinguish between effort and presence, and who was not yet ready to believe those 2 things were the same. It was on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks into the arrangement, that Victoria saw the notebook. She had come downstairs for water and found Lily sitting on the 3rd step from the bottom, back against the banister, the blue notebook open across her knees. The girl was writing with the focused stillness of someone who had been doing this long enough that it no longer required thought, just the movement of the pen and whatever needed to come out of her. Victoria stopped in the hallway. Lily didn't look up. She stood there longer than she meant to. She watched the pen move across the page and thought about what it meant that a 9-year-old had developed out of necessity a private system for processing what her life kept handing her. She thought about what was in those pages. She thought about whether she would ever be the kind of person who was worth writing about in a way that wasn't painful. She got her water. She went back upstairs. She did not sleep well that night, which was becoming a pattern she didn't fully understand yet. The Foundation press conference was scheduled for a Thursday morning in April, in the atrium of Hayes Global Medical's headquarters downtown. Victoria was announcing the creation of a pediatric cardiac research fund, $20 million, named after her sister Renee, targeted specifically at congenital heart conditions in children under 12. She had not told Ethan that last part. She hadn't found the right moment. Or perhaps, more accurately, she had found several right moments and chosen not to use them. The morning went wrong within the first 7 minutes. A reporter in the third row, a woman Ethan didn't recognize, but Victoria clearly did from the way her expression shifted, raised her hand before the formal Q&A and asked whether the recent marriage between Victoria Hayes and Ethan Cole represented a strategic rebranding effort designed to distance Hayes Global Medical from its historical relationship with Hartwell Systems and the safety violations that had resulted in multiple patient injuries. The atrium went quiet in the way that large rooms go quiet when something real has just happened in them. Ethan felt the floor tilt slightly under him. He stood at the side of the stage and felt the specific vertigo of understanding several things simultaneously. That Victoria's company had connections to Hartwell, that she had known this when she approached him, and that the thing she hadn't told him might be the same thing that had ended his career and complicated his daughter's heart. He looked at Victoria. She was looking at the reporter, and her face was doing something complicated and controlled. Then Mia's hand appeared inside his. And then Lily walked up the side steps onto the stage. She crossed to the podium with the unhurried confidence of someone who had decided what she was going to say and was not afraid of the room. She reached the microphone. It was too tall for her, and a technician moved to adjust it, and she waited with complete patience while he did. And then she looked out at the press corps and said, "If she married our dad to lie, I'll never forgive her. But if she married our dad because she's trying to fix something she got wrong, can grown-ups give someone a chance to do that?" She stepped back from the microphone. She walked back down the steps and stood beside Ethan and took Mia's other hand. Victoria stood at the podium for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then something in her face gave way, not collapsed, just opened, and she pressed her hand briefly over her mouth, and the cameras caught it, and she did not try to hide it. In the car afterward, no one spoke for almost 10 minutes. Then Mia said from the back seat, "Did we do okay?" And Lily said, "Yeah, I think we did okay." Ethan started pulling threads the weekend after the press conference. He told himself it was due diligence. He sat at the desk in the East Wing guest room after the girls were asleep and opened his laptop and started with what he knew Hartwell Systems. The calibration error, his termination, the blacklist. What he found after 2 nights of careful searching was a name that kept appearing at the edges of everything. Nathan Vale, Executive Vice President of Operations at Hayes Global Medical, a position he had held for 14 years. His fingerprints were on the Hartwell acquisition that had happened 18 months after Ethan's firing. His name appeared in 3 separate industry arbitration filings related to device safety disputes, all of which had been settled privately and sealed. He had been, by every available indication, the man responsible for managing Hartwell-related liability on behalf of Hayes Global Medical for over a decade. Ethan printed what he could find and put it in a folder and did not yet tell Victoria what he was looking at. He wasn't ready to trust her with the shape of what he was beginning to understand. Nathan Vale moved first. He was a careful man who preferred to work through channels that couldn't be easily traced back to him. What he released to the press was technically accurate, a confirmation that Victoria Hayes and Ethan Cole had signed a 1-year contractual marriage agreement, obtained through sources he never identified, distributed through intermediaries he never named. By the time it appeared in 3 separate outlets on a Tuesday morning, it had already been framed as a story about a desperate billionaire manufacturing a humanitarian image to outrun a corporate scandal. The coverage was immediate and cruel in the specific way that media cruelty operates, not through lies exactly, but through the selection of true things arranged to produce a false impression. Billionaire's marriage, a business transaction, sources say. Hayes Global Medical Chairman pays for family-friendly rebrand. The daughters in the deal. What Victoria Hayes really bought, Lily found out at school. Not from a teacher or a counselor, but from a girl in her class named Brooke, who showed her the headline on a phone during lunch, and said with the particular precision of a 10-year-old who has learned to weaponize information. "So your family is just like hired." Lily said nothing. She ate the rest of her lunch. She came home and went directly to her room and sat on her bed and opened her notebook and did not write anything for a long time. Mia heard it differently. She overheard Ethan on a phone call with his attorney that evening, a conversation he had taken into the hallway, not far enough away and caught enough words to construct a question. She brought to him afterward, standing in the kitchen doorway in her socks. "Dad, is Victoria our real mom now, or is she a temporary mom?" Ethan set down what he was holding. He crouched down to her level and looked at her face, and took a moment before answering the way he always did, when he wanted to make sure he was telling her the truth, rather than just the version that would make her feel better. "She's real," he said. "What that means exactly, we're still figuring out." Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Okay," she said, and went back to her room. Ethan stood in the kitchen for a while after that, not moving. That night, he sat alone in the hallway outside the girls' rooms and let himself think the thing he had been not thinking for 2 weeks. He thought about the first morning in the house, when he had come downstairs at 6 and found Victoria already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with Mia's medication schedule printed out and annotated in her own handwriting, not a copy someone had made for her. Her handwriting, with questions in the margins about timing and food interactions that she had clearly stayed up researching. He thought about the afternoon Mia had spiked a fever, and Victoria had sat beside her bed for 3 hours, not doing anything in particular, just being present in the way that sick children need someone to be present, not leaving, even when Mia fell asleep. He thought about the evening he had found Victoria in the bathroom hallway, with her phone propped against the mirror, watching a tutorial on how to do a French braid, rewinding the same 12-second clip, over and over, with the focused frustration of someone who was not accustomed to not being good at things immediately. She had done all of that when no one was asking her to, when no contract required it, when the cameras were nowhere near the house. Ethan pressed the back of his head against the wall and looked at the ceiling, and understood with the reluctant clarity of a man who had been trying hard not to understand something, that his anger was easier to maintain than it was accurate. He didn't go to sleep for a long time. Nathan's next move was the cusp. He called an emergency session of the Hayes Global Medical Board of Directors on a Friday, citing fiduciary concerns related to reputational damage caused by the chairman's personal conduct. He presented the contractual marriage agreement as evidence of deliberate deception of shareholders and the public. He framed Ethan as an opportunist who had leveraged his daughter's illness to gain access to Hayes Global Medical's resources. He framed Victoria as a woman whose judgment had become compromised by guilt and isolation. It was a well-constructed case. Nathan Vale had spent 14 years learning exactly which words moved which people in that room. The board scheduled a vote for the following Monday. That same Friday evening, Mia's heart monitor alarmed at 11:43. By midnight, she was in an ambulance. By 12:30, she was stable, admitted for observation. A mild cardiac episode that the attending physician said was manageable, but not ignorable. Ethan sat in the hospital chair beside her bed and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding something up for too long and is no longer sure what he's holding or why. Victoria arrived at 1 in the morning. She had not been called. She had simply arrived. She did not come into the room. She stood outside the glass, and Ethan saw her through it, and they looked at each other for a moment, and then he looked away. Inside the room, Lily had pulled her chair close to Mia's bed and was holding her sister's hand. She didn't know Victoria was outside. She spoke quietly, the way she did when she thought no one could hear her. "Don't be scared," she told Mia. "If Victoria doesn't keep her word, I won't forgive her. I mean it." Victoria heard it through the glass. She stood in the hallway for a long time after that, not going anywhere. In the morning, Ethan came out of the room and found her still there, sitting in a plastic waiting room chair, coat still on, with the specific look of a woman who has been awake all night and has used the time to arrive at something. "I have to tell you the truth," she said. "All of it. And I need you to let me finish before you respond." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down in the chair beside her. Victoria told him everything. She told him about Renee, younger by 4 years, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and kept houseplants alive and called their mother every Sunday without being reminded. She told him about the surgery, which had been routine, which had been described to the family using the same language surgeons always used. Low risk, standard procedure, home by the weekend. She told him how Renee had died on a Tuesday morning in a hospital room in Boston. While Victoria was on a conference call, she had not ended in time. She told him that the official report had attributed Renee's death to surgical complications, that she had accepted this because she had been handed a document by people in suits who used careful language, and because grief makes it easier to accept explanations than to question them, and because Nathan Vale had told her personally that the matter had been reviewed internally and found to be an isolated incident. She told him that 6 weeks ago, a private investigator had placed a folder on her desk. "The calibration error you reported," she said. "The one at Hartwell. Nathan knew about it before you filed your first report. He had been monitoring internal communications at Hartwell because Hayes Global was in acquisition talks with 2 of their competitors, and he had access to their safety correspondence. He knew there was a defect. He made a calculation that disclosure would complicate the acquisitions, drive up liability costs, and create regulatory problems at a time when Hayes Global couldn't afford them." She paused. "He let it stay quiet. He managed the fallout case by case, privately, for years. Your report was the one that almost broke it open, so he had you removed." Ethan sat very still. "My wife," he said. "Clara." The device involved in her surgical complication was a Hartwell pressure monitoring unit, the same product line. She held his gaze steadily. "I know you suspected it from the beginning. I know the records you tried to access were sealed. My investigator found what remained, enough to confirm the connection, even with what Nathan destroyed." The hallway was very quiet. "You knew this?" Ethan said, "when you came to me in that waiting room?" "I knew some of it. I've learned more since." She held his gaze. "I came to you because I needed someone with standing, someone who had been harmed and could prove it, inside the structure of my life where Nathan couldn't easily isolate me. That was the calculation. She stopped. But I also came because Mia's file crossed my desk when my investigator was pulling Hartwell patient records. And I read it. And I couldn't leave it there. Ethan looked at the floor, then at the wall, then at his hands. You used us, he said. Yes, she said. At the beginning. And now? She didn't answer immediately, which was Ethan had come to understand about Victoria Hayes, its own kind of answer. Now I'm telling you the truth, she said, which is what I should have done in that hospital waiting room. And I'm telling you because you deserve to make an actual decision, not the one I maneuvered you into. He didn't respond that day. He went back into Mia's room and sat beside her until she woke up, and then he got her breakfast from the cafeteria and watched her eat it. That evening, after Mia fell asleep again, he went through everything he had printed and laid it out beside what Victoria had just told him. The pieces fit. Nathan Vale had known about the Hartwell defect. Nathan Vale had managed the suppression of that information across more than a decade. Nathan Vale had cost Ethan his career, his wife, and nearly his daughter's health. Victoria had not done those things. She had built the structure Nathan operated inside of, and she had not looked closely enough. And Ethan was not yet ready to decide whether that made her culpable or simply human in the way that powerful people sometimes are, too surrounded by managed information to see what's being managed. But it meant something specific and important. That she was sitting in a plastic hospital chair at 1 a.m, telling him all of it, when she could have told him none of it. She had chosen to give him the information he needed to leave. He thought about the French braid tutorial, the medication schedule with the handwritten margins, the 3 hours beside Mia's bed during the fever, not moving, not leaving. He thought about what Lily had said through the glass. If she doesn't keep her word, I won't forgive her. And he thought, she kept her word in the only way that actually counts. She stayed when staying was costly. She told the truth when lying would have been easier. He picked up his phone. The Hayes Global Medical Board meeting was held in a 42nd floor conference room on a Monday morning. Nathan Vale opened the session with the confidence of a man who had run the numbers and found them favorable. He presented his case in the ordered, reasonable tone of someone who understood that the appearance of objectivity was more persuasive than emotion. The contractual marriage agreement, the reputational liability, the pattern of compromised judgment. He was thorough. He was convincing. He had clearly been preparing this for longer than the past 2 weeks. When he finished, he looked across the table at Victoria with the expression of a man who believed the matter was settled. Then Ethan set his folder on the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform anger or grief or vindication. He had spent 11 years as a field engineer, and the thing that work had trained out of him was the impulse to editorialize. Evidence was either sufficient or it wasn't. He laid out what he had. The emails recovered by Victoria's investigator from a backup server Nathan had believed was wiped, in which Nathan explicitly acknowledged the Hartwell calibration defect and directed subordinates to manage individual cases privately rather than initiate a recall. The termination paperwork for Ethan's position processed 4 days after Nathan's office received Ethan's second safety report. The falsified validation data submitted to the FDA on the pressure monitoring product line. The list of patients, 47 names across 6 states over 9 years, whose complications were consistent with the defect. Renee Hayes was on the list. Clara Cole was on the list. The room was very quiet by the time Ethan closed the folder. Then Lily, who had been sitting beside him in a chair slightly too large for her, stood up. She placed her blue notebook on the table and opened it to the first page and slid it toward the center of the room. "Mr. Nathan said she was pretending," Lily said. that she was using us for her image, that everything she did was for the cameras. She looked around the table at each face in turn with the unhurried patience of someone who had already decided she was not afraid of this room. I've been writing in this notebook since the day we moved in. I wrote down everything I saw, because my mom told me to write down the things I didn't want to forget. She pointed to a page near the middle. 3 in the morning because Mia had a fever and she didn't want to wake the night nurse. A YouTube video about French braids because she didn't want to ask the housekeeper to do it, she wanted to learn herself. The day Mia called her mom by accident and she went into the hallway so we wouldn't see her cry. She looked at Nathan Vale directly. People who are performing for cameras do it when cameras are there. She did it when nobody was watching. That's not a performance. That's just who she is. She sat back down. Ethan put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Then he looked at the board and said quietly, "This marriage started as a contract. My family is not a contract anymore." The board voted that same afternoon. Nathan Vale was removed from his position by a margin of 9-2. An independent investigation was opened within the week. Nathan's legal team filed 3 separate motions in the first 10 days, all of which were denied. He did not come back to the 42nd floor. Victoria stood before the press the following Thursday and did not use the word regret once. She used the word responsible 11 times, Lily counted, because Lily counted things. She announced the independent investigation, the patient compensation fund, and a complete restructuring of Hayes Global Medical's internal safety reporting system, the new framework of which would be named at Victoria's specific request after the engineer whose reports had been suppressed for 11 years. Ethan found out about the naming when he read it in the press release. Victoria had not told him. When he asked her why, she said, "Because I didn't want you to tell me not to." He didn't have a good answer to that. He let it stand. The weeks that followed were quieter than anything Ethan had experienced in a long time. Mia's treatment proceeded under the care of a specialist Victoria had recruited from Johns Hopkins, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who had the gift of explaining complicated cardiac mechanics to 6-year-olds using analogies involving plumbing and garden hoses. Mia liked her enormously and told everyone so. Her numbers improved steadily. By the end of the month, she was cleared for light outdoor activity, which she celebrated by spending 45 minutes in the backyard, attempting to catch a bird with her bare hands, unsuccessfully, but without cardiac incident. Lily went back to school. The story had moved on, the way stories do, replaced by other stories with fresher edges. She simply went back to reading at lunch and answering questions in class with the quiet precision that her teachers had already come to expect. And she let the whole thing settle into the past, where it belonged. At home, something was shifting, slowly, without announcement, in the way that real changes tend to happen. Lily still locked her door at 9. But she had started leaving it open until 8:45, which was 45 minutes later than before. She had also, without comment or explanation, moved her blue notebook from under her pillow to the top of her nightstand, where it was visible, but still hers. Victoria noticed. She said nothing. She understood by now that with Lily, the correct response to progress was to receive it quietly and not make it into an occasion. On a Saturday in early May, Victoria attempted to make a birthday cake. Mia's birthday was the following Tuesday, and Victoria had decided independently, without consulting anyone, that she would bake it herself. She had identified a recipe. She had purchased the ingredients with specific attention to detail. She had cleared her Saturday morning schedule, which was not a small thing. What she had not accounted for was the gap between the precision of a recipe and the reality of a kitchen that did not behave like a controlled environment. The first cake came out of the oven 20 minutes early because she had misread the temperature setting raw in the center and scorched on the edges in a way that was objectively impressive in its totality of failure. The second attempt rose correctly, but tilted dramatically to the left during cooling, listing like a ship that had made a poor decision. The frosting applied to the tilted cake slid in a slow and inevitable avalanche to the lower side and pooled on the cake board in a way that was almost peaceful to watch. Victoria stood at the counter and looked at it. Mia came into the kitchen, assessed the situation, and climbed onto a stool. "It looks like it got tired," Mia said. "It did," Victoria agreed. "Can we still eat it?" "Structurally," Victoria said, "I believe so." Mia picked up a finger of frosting from the pool on the cake board and ate it thoughtfully. "It tastes good," she said. "The outside part just looks bad." "That," Victoria said, "is the kindest review I have ever received." Ethan appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene, the listing cake, the frosting catastrophe. His younger daughter perched on a stool acting as culinary critic, and felt something move through him that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter and more durable than happiness. The sense of a house that was actually being lived in. He came in and cut 3 slices. They ate at the kitchen counter, which was not where you were supposed to eat in a house like this, and nobody mentioned it. That night, after Mia was in bed, Ethan found Victoria on the back porch. She was sitting in one of the outdoor chairs, looking at the yard, which was dark and still and smelled like cut grass in early summer. He sat down beside her. They were quiet for a while, the specific ease of 2 people who no longer felt the need to fill silence with performance. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said. "And I want to say it clearly, so there's no misunderstanding about what I mean." He waited. "I came to you in that hospital because I had calculated that you were useful. You and the girls both." She kept her eyes on the yard. "I knew that going in. I made the decision deliberately. And I think you deserve to hear me say that directly, without qualification. That is how it started." "I know," Ethan said. "What I didn't calculate," she continued, "was Lily asking me if I'd ever stayed up all night afraid of losing someone. I didn't calculate Mia calling me mom by accident and what that would do to me. I didn't calculate any of the parts that actually mattered." She paused. "I stay now because I want to, not because of guilt, not because of the contract. Because this is the first place in a very long time that has felt like somewhere I belong." Ethan looked at the yard for a moment. "I was furious at you," he said. "For a long time. Even when I could see you were trying, I held on to the anger because it felt safer than the alternative." "What was the alternative?" "Believing you." He turned to look at her. "I believe you." Victoria held his gaze, and then something in her face opened up without her trying to manage it. Not the grief of the press conference, but something steadier. Something that had been waiting for a long time to have somewhere to land. The school spring performance was held on a Friday evening, in the gymnasium decorated with paper stars and a backdrop painted by the 3rd and 4th grade art class. Lily had a speaking part. She had not told anyone how big it was. They found out when she walked to the front of the stage and the teacher handed her the microphone. Before she went on, she looked out into the audience and found Victoria's face. She held it for a moment. Then she said quietly enough that only the front row could hear, "I asked you once if you really loved us. I know the answer now." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "How?" Lily's mouth curved. "Because you stayed. When it was hard. People who are pretending leave when it gets hard." She adjusted her grip on the microphone. "You stayed. So." She walked to the center of the stage. After the performance, the four of them stood outside the gymnasium in the parking lot. It had rained earlier, and the asphalt was still wet, catching the light from the building in long, broken reflections. The air smelled like spring and damp concrete. Mia held out both hands, palms up, checking for more rain. Lily stood close enough to Victoria that their shoulders touched, which she had not done before, and which she did not remark upon, and which Victoria received in the manner she had learned to receive all of Lily's overtures. Quietly, without making it an occasion, with the complete attention of someone who understood that some gifts are only given once. Ethan reached over and took Victoria's hand. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything, because nothing needed to be said. Above them, the clouds had broken. Mia announced that she could see a star. Lily said that was probably a satellite. Mia said she didn't care what it was, she was making a wish on it anyway. Nobody argued with that. Their family had not started with perfect love. It had started with a contract, a secret, and a 9-year-old girl who asked the question that none of the adults had been brave enough to ask. What held it together in the end was not the terms of any agreement. It was the simpler and more demanding thing, the choice made again and again to stay. Not because staying was easy, not because the people involved were perfect or hadn't made mistakes, or hadn't hurt each other in ways that took time to repair, but because they looked at what was in front of them and decided it was worth showing up for. That's the thing about family. The real kind. The kind that lasts. It's not built in a moment. It's built in the ordinary ones. The 3 a.m. fevers. The lopsided cakes. The notebooks no one was supposed to see. The small, consistent decision to stay when leaving would have been easier. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that love isn't always a feeling first, sometimes it's a choice you make before the feeling catches up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories here about the moments that quietly change everything. We'd love to have you stay.